In a world that celebrates loud achievements and grand gestures, we often overlook the small, steady victories that truly change lives. This is a story about Henry, an ordinary man who discovered that the most meaningful transformations happen quietly, in the small choices we make each day. It's a reminder that success isn't always accompanied by applause, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply keep going, one gentle step at a time. Henry sat at his desk on a Wednesday afternoon, staring at the same spreadsheet he'd been looking at for the past 45 minutes. The numbers blurred together, and he realized he hadn't actually processed a single cell. Outside his office window, the March sky hung gray and heavy, threatening rain that never quite came. He was 42 years old, and somewhere along the way he'd become invisible. Not literally, of course. People saw him. His coworkers nodded when he passed in the hallway. The barista at the coffee shop downstairs knew his order. His sister called every Sunday. But Henry felt like he was watching his own life from behind a thick pane of glass. Present but not quite participating. There but not quite alive. The feeling had crept up slowly, so gradually that he couldn't pinpoint when it started. Maybe it was after the promotion that went to someone else 3 years ago. Maybe it was when he stopped going to the gym because he was too tired. Maybe it was the accumulation of 1,000 small surrenders, each one barely noticeable on its own, but together forming a weight that pressed down on his chest every morning when his alarm went off. Henry had become an expert at getting through the day. He knew exactly how to smile just enough to avoid questions. He knew which routes through the office allowed him to encounter the fewest people. He knew how to fill his evenings with just enough distraction. Television, scrolling through his phone, the occasional half-hearted attempt at reading a book, to make it to bedtime without having to think too hard about anything. The problem was that Henry couldn't remember the last time he'd felt truly excited about anything, the last time he'd laughed until his sides hurt, the last time he'd woken up looking forward to the day ahead. Henry. He looked up to find Marcus, the new intern, standing in his doorway. Marcus was 23, still bright-eyed and enthusiastic about everything. Henry sometimes found this exhausting. "Hey, Marcus, what's up? I just wanted to thank you for helping me with that report yesterday. Mr. Patterson said it was exactly what he needed." Henry nodded. "Sure, no problem." Marcus hesitated, as if waiting for something more, then smiled and walked away. Henry turned back to his spreadsheet. He'd helped Marcus because it was easier than explaining why he couldn't. He'd done a good job because Henry always did good work. It was the one thing he could still control in a life that felt increasingly out of his hands. That evening, Henry rode the subway home in his usual spot, standing near the doors even though there were seats available. He didn't read or listen to music. He just stood there, watching the tunnel walls flash by in the darkness, feeling the rhythm of the train beneath his feet. His apartment was quiet when he got home. It was always quiet. He'd lived alone for 6 years now, since the breakup with Rachel. That was another thing Henry had gotten used to, the silence, the space that was entirely his own, which had once felt like freedom but now just felt like emptiness. He made dinner mechanically, pasta with Jared sauce, a salad from a bag, a glass of water. He ate in front of the television, watching a show he'd seen before and didn't particularly like. Then he cleaned up, took a shower, and lay in bed scrolling through his phone until his eyes hurt. At 11:47 p.m., Henry put his phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. In the darkness, without the distraction of screens or noise, the question he'd been avoiding all day finally surfaced. Is this it? Is this all there is? He wasn't unhappy exactly. He had a job, health insurance, a roof over his head. By most objective measures, he was fine. But fine had started to feel like a cage, and Henry couldn't shake the feeling that he was wasting something precious. Time, potential, life itself, just going through the motions. The thought kept him awake for another hour. What Henry didn't know, couldn't know, was that this Wednesday night would later mark a turning point. But not because of anything dramatic, not because of any sudden revelation or life-changing event. The turning point would come simply because Henry was finally tired enough of feeling tired. Thursday morning arrived the way Thursday mornings always did. Henry's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. He hit snooze once, then twice, then finally dragged himself out of bed at 6:48 a.m., already behind schedule and already exhausted. But as he stood in the shower, letting the hot water run over his face, something unexpected happened. A thought appeared, clear and simple. What if I just tried one thing differently today? Not everything, not a complete life overhaul, just one thing. The thought was so quiet he almost missed it, so reasonable it didn't feel threatening. Henry had tried to change before. Ambitious New Year's resolutions, grand plans that lasted a week before life got in the way. But one thing, one small thing, that seemed possible. By the time he'd dried off and gotten dressed, Henry had decided. Today he would take the stairs instead of the elevator. That was it. His office was on the 4th floor, which wasn't unreasonable. It would take maybe 2 extra minutes. When he reached his building, the elevator doors were already open, and 3 people were stepping inside. Henry paused. His body wanted to follow them, to do what it always did. But he'd made a decision. He turned toward the stairwell. The door was heavy and complained with a loud creak as he pulled it open. The stairwell smelled faintly of concrete and disinfectant. Henry began climbing, and by the 2nd floor, he was breathing harder than he'd expected. By the 3rd floor, his legs were protesting. When he finally pushed open the door to the 4th floor, he was genuinely winded. It was humbling, really, how out of shape he'd become. But he'd done it. No one noticed. No one congratulated him. Marcus didn't appear with a medal. The world continued exactly as it had before. Henry sat down at his desk, caught his breath, and opened his email. But something tiny had shifted. That evening, on the subway ride home, Henry thought about the stairs. It had been uncomfortable. But he'd also felt more awake during the morning than he usually did. His body had woken up, even if just for those few minutes. What if I did it again tomorrow? He thought. Friday, he took the stairs again. This time, he was slightly less winded. Saturday morning, for the first time in months, Henry woke up without an alarm. He lay in bed for a moment, feeling the silence of the weekend, and another quiet thought arrived. What if I went for a walk? Henry couldn't remember the last time he'd gone for a walk that wasn't to accomplish something. To get to work, to buy groceries, to reach a destination. A walk just for the sake of walking seemed almost indulgent. He put on sneakers he'd forgotten he owned and stepped outside. The morning was cool and bright. Henry walked with no plan, letting his feet choose directions at random. He noticed things he'd stopped seeing. The way morning light caught in the trees, the sound of a dog barking in someone's backyard, the smell of coffee drifting from a cafe he'd never been to. He walked for 30 minutes, then went home and made breakfast. Real breakfast, not just coffee and toast. He scrambled eggs, made tea, and sat at his kitchen table instead of in front of the television. The weekend continued in this strange, new rhythm. Sunday morning, Henry woke up and went for another walk, longer this time. He felt his legs growing stronger, his breathing coming easier. These were small things barely worth mentioning, but they were his. On Sunday evening, sitting in his living room with a book he was actually reading, Henry realized something. He felt better, not transformed, not fixed, not suddenly happy, just better, a little less heavy, a little more present. The thought both comforted and scared him, because if this was what just a few small changes could do, it meant he'd been more lost than he'd wanted to admit. But it also meant that maybe, just maybe, finding his way back was possible. Weeks passed, then months. Henry kept taking the stairs. He kept going for morning walks on weekends. These habits became so routine that he stopped thinking about them. They just became what he did. In April, he added something new. He started bringing lunch from home instead of eating at his desk while working. This meant he had to grocery shop on Sunday afternoons. It meant he had to spend 20 minutes in the evening preparing food for the next day. It would have been easier to order takeout or grab something from the cafeteria. But Henry had discovered something interesting. The easy choices that saved him 10 minutes here and there were the same choices that left him feeling depleted. The slightly harder choices, the ones that required a bit more effort, seemed to add something back. He couldn't explain it to anyone. How do you tell someone that packing a lunch feels like taking care of yourself? That climbing 4 flights of stairs each morning has become a moment of quiet pride? That going for walks has turned into the part of the week you actually look forward to? These weren't the kind of accomplishments people celebrated. There were no milestones, no before and after photos, no dramatic reveals. Henry wasn't training for a marathon or losing noticeable weight or achieving any particular goal. He was just being a little more intentional about the small moments that made up his days. In May, something unexpected happened. Marcus stopped by his desk again. This time not for help, but just to talk. "You seem different lately," Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe. "Different how?" Henry asked, genuinely curious. Marcus thought about it. "I don't know. More. Here? Does that make sense?" Henry smiled. It made perfect sense. That evening, Henry did something he hadn't done in years. He called an old friend. Tom had been his roommate in college, and they'd been close once, before life and distance and busy schedules had reduced their friendship to occasional likes on social media. The phone rang 4 times, and Henry almost hung up. What was he doing? This was weird. They hadn't actually talked in. "Henry? Is that really you?" Tom's voice was warm and surprised. They talked for an hour, catching up on everything and nothing. When Henry finally hung up, his face hurt from smiling. Why had he waited so long to do that? What had he been afraid of? The answer, he realized, was that he'd been afraid of being a burden, afraid of seeming needy or desperate, afraid of admitting that he was lonely. But Tom had been happy to hear from him. They'd made plans to meet for dinner the following week. June brought summer heat and longer days. Henry started staying after work once a week to help Marcus and another intern with their projects. He didn't have to, and it wasn't part of his job description, but he found he enjoyed it. Teaching someone else helped him remember what he knew, what he was capable of. One evening, as he was leaving later than usual, he ran into his boss, Mrs. Chun, by the elevator. "Henry," she said, "I've been meaning to talk to you. I've noticed you've been more engaged lately, contributing more in meetings, mentoring the new staff. It hasn't gone unnoticed." Henry felt his face flush. "Oh, thank you. I'm serious. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." As Henry rode the subway home that night, he thought about Mrs. Chen's words. The truth was, he hadn't consciously decided to contribute more in meetings. He just found that he had more energy to participate. The mentoring had just happened naturally. The changes he'd made in his private life, the morning walks, the home-cooked meals, the phone calls with old friends, had somehow given him more to bring to his public life. It was all connected in ways he was only beginning to understand. July started well. Henry had established a rhythm to his days that felt sustainable. He was sleeping better. His apartment felt less like a place to hide and more like a home. He'd even started tending to the plants his sister had given him years ago, which he'd previously kept alive only accidentally. Then his father got sick. The call came on a Tuesday evening. His mother's voice was steady but strained. His dad had collapsed at work. They were at the hospital. The doctors were running tests. Henry drove 3 hours to his parents' house that night, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, his mind racing through possibilities he didn't want to consider. The next week was a blur of hospital waiting rooms, hushed conversations with doctors, and the strange, suspended time that exists when you're waiting for news. The tests came back. His father had had a minor stroke. He would recover, but it would take time and rehabilitation. Henry stayed with his parents, sleeping on their couch, taking time off work. He helped his mother coordinate care, drove his father to appointments, and managed medications. The routines he'd built, the morning walks, the careful meals, the steady progress, disappeared completely. He ate hospital cafeteria food and whatever was quick. He slept when he could. The stairs in the hospital became an obligation, not a choice. By the time Henry returned to his own apartment 2 weeks later, exhausted and emotionally drained, he felt like he'd lost everything he'd gained. The apartment felt foreign. His running shoes sat in the corner, accusingly unused. The routine that had felt so solid now seemed impossibly far away. The first morning back, his alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. Henry hit snooze, then snooze again. Finally, he got up at 7:15, already late, already back in the old pattern. When he reached his office building, he didn't even think about it. He took the elevator. That evening, Henry sat on his couch and felt the familiar weight settling back onto his chest. Of course it didn't last. Of course he'd slipped back. Maybe this was just who he was. Someone who tried and failed, who made temporary progress only to end up right back where he'd started. He went to bed discouraged, sure that everything he'd worked for was gone. Wednesday morning, Henry woke up tired, but as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he remembered something his father had said in the hospital. They'd been sitting together in the quiet of the rehabilitation room. His father, frustrated by how weak he felt, had said, "I used to be able to do so much more. Now I can barely walk down the hallway without getting tired." Henry had responded without thinking, "But you're walking. Yesterday you couldn't even stand up on your own. You're not where you were, but you're also not where you started." His father had looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I guess you're right." Now, lying in his own bed, Henry realized the advice applied to him too. He wasn't where he'd been in June, but he also wasn't where he'd been in March. He'd had 2 hard weeks. That didn't erase 4 months of small, steady progress. It didn't mean he had to start from zero. He just lost his footing for a moment. That's all. He could find it again. Henry got out of bed. He put on clothes suitable for walking. He went outside and walked for just 15 minutes, half his usual route, but still a walk. His body was tired, and the walk wasn't enjoyable in the way it used to be. But he did it. At work, he stood at the base of the stairwell for a long moment. For floors, it seemed harder than it had months ago, but he'd already decided. He climbed. By the second floor, he remembered this feeling, the exertion, the slight burn in his legs. By the fourth floor, he was breathing hard, but he was there. That evening, he made dinner instead of ordering takeout. Nothing fancy, just the familiar routine of cooking something simple. The next day, he did it again, and the day after that. Henry realized something crucial. Starting again was different from starting over. He still knew how to take the stairs. He still knew the walking routes. He still had Tom's number in his phone. None of that had disappeared. He'd just stopped doing it for a while. The return wasn't as quick or as linear as he'd hoped. Some days were better than others. There were mornings when he took the elevator because he just couldn't face the stairs. There were evenings when he ate cereal for dinner because cooking felt like too much. But more days than not, he did the things that made him feel like himself. And slowly, the rhythm came back. By September, Henry's father had recovered enough to return to light work. His parents were managing well, and Henry's life had returned to its new normal, the one built on small, intentional choices. One Friday afternoon, Mrs. Chun stopped by his desk. "Henry, do you have a moment?" He followed her to her office, curious and slightly nervous. Mrs. Chun gestured for him to sit. "I wanted to tell you before the official announcement goes out next week. We're creating a new senior position to oversee project coordination and mentorship for our junior staff. After considerable discussion, we'd like to offer it to you." Henry stared at her. Really? You've shown consistent leadership this year. You've helped develop our interns and junior staff members. You show up, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. That's become rare and valuable." She smiled. "The position comes with a significant raise and a new office, if you're interested." "Yes," Henry said, then cleared his throat. "Yes, I'm very interested. Thank you." Walking back to his desk, Henry felt strange. This was the kind of success he'd wanted years ago, the kind he'd stopped believing would come. And now it was here, offered to him in such a matter-of-fact way. But what struck him most was Mrs. Chen's phrasing. "You show up." He did show up now. Not perfectly, not every single day without fail, but consistently. And somehow, that consistency had been visible to others even when Henry hadn't been trying to be seen. That evening, Henry called his sister to tell her the news. Then he called Tom. Then, after hesitating, he called his parents. His father answered, voice still a bit weak but getting stronger every day. "That's wonderful, son. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Dad." "You know what?" his father said. "Being in the hospital, doing all that rehab, it taught me something. Progress isn't always visible. Most days I couldn't tell if I was getting better. But the therapist would show me these charts and there it was, improvement. Slow but real. I think a lot of things in life are like that." After they hung up, Henry sat in his living room and thought about the past 6 months. If someone had told him in March that taking the stairs would lead to a promotion, he would have laughed. But that wasn't really how it worked. The stairs didn't lead to the promotion. Neither did the walks or the home-cooked meals or the phone calls to old friends. What happened was simpler and more complex. By taking care of himself in small ways, he'd gradually become someone who had more to give. More energy, more presence, more engagement with his own life. And that person naturally did things differently at work, participated more, helped more, showed up more fully. The victory wasn't in the promotion, though that was nice. The victory was in the 6 months of mornings when he chose the stairs, on the weekend walks that no one saw, in the evenings of cooking dinner for himself when it would have been easier to order in the decision to call Tom after years of silence, in getting up after the setback and starting again. These were victories that happened in private, in the small moments that made up a life. No one had witnessed most of them. No one had cheered or kept score. But they had mattered. They had changed everything. A year after that Wednesday afternoon when Henry had stared at his spreadsheet and felt invisible, he woke up on another Wednesday morning. His alarm went off at 6:15 a.m., earlier than before, but he'd found he liked having extra time in the morning. He got up without snoozing. He made coffee and breakfast while listening to a podcast. He ate at his kitchen table, watching the morning light come through the window. The plants his sister had given him were thriving now, their leaves reaching toward the sun. At 7 a.m., he laced up his running shoes, yes, running shoes. Somewhere around August, his walks had naturally evolved into jogs, and then into actual runs. He wasn't training for anything, just running because his body enjoyed the movement, the rhythm, the way it made him feel awake and alive. He ran his usual route through the neighborhood, greeting the other early morning people, the woman walking her golden retriever, the older man who did Tai Chi in the park, the teenage boy delivering newspapers. These people had become familiar, part of the texture of his mornings. Back home, showered and dressed, Henry grabbed his lunch from the refrigerator. He'd made extra dinner last night, as he usually did now. He picked up his work bag and his travel mug of coffee. The subway was crowded, but Henry didn't mind. He brought a book and found a spot to stand. He was reading a biography of an artist he admired, and he was actually enjoying it, actually remembering what he read. At the office, he took the stairs to his new office on the 7th floor. 7 flights. A year ago, 4 flights had left him winded. Now, he climbed 7 without thinking much about it. His office had a window. This still surprised him sometimes. He could see out over the city, watching the weather change throughout the day. The morning passed in a flow of work, a productive meeting, a coaching session with one of the interns, time to focus on a complex project he was leading. Henry found himself engaged, interested, and present. At lunch, he went to the building's rooftop where they'd installed some tables and chairs. Marcus and a few others were already there. Henry joined them and they talked about work and movies and weekend plans. Easy conversation, the kind that happens between people who genuinely like each other. In the afternoon, Mrs. Chun stopped by to ask his opinion on a hiring decision. They talked for 20 minutes, and Henry found he had clear thoughts on the matter. A year ago, he would have mumbled something non-committal. Now he spoke up. Around 4 p.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Still on for dinner Saturday? Sarah's excited to finally meet you." Henry smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it." Tom had started dating Sarah a few months ago, and their friendship had expanded to include her. Henry was also seeing someone now, Emma, a teacher he'd met at a bookstore in October. It was early still, just 2 months in, but it felt different from past relationships. Steadier, built on a foundation of someone who knew himself better. The workday ended. Henry packed up his things, said goodbye to colleagues, and took the stairs back down. On the subway ride home, he didn't scroll through his phone. He just stood there, letting his mind wander, watching the tunnel walls flash by. But this time, instead of feeling like he was sleepwalking through life, he felt peaceful, content. At home, he changed into comfortable clothes and started making dinner. He'd invited his sister over, and she'd be arriving in about an hour. He put on music and chopped vegetables, following a new recipe he wanted to try. While the food cooked, he watered his plants and tidied up a bit. His apartment looked lived in now. Books on the coffee table, photos on the walls, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair. Not messy, just inhabited. The doorbell rang. "Hey," his sister said, giving him a hug as she came in. "Something smells amazing." They ate dinner at his small kitchen table, talking about their week, their parents, her kids. After dinner, they moved to the couch with tea, and the conversation turned more serious. "You seem really good, Henry," his sister said. "Different than you did a year ago. Happier." Henry thought about how to answer. He could tell her about the promotion, about Emma, about the various external things that had changed. But those weren't really the answer. "I think I just started paying attention," he said finally, "to small things, to myself. I stopped waiting for my life to start and just started living the one I already had." His sister nodded. "That makes sense. I'm glad. I was worried about you for a while there." After she left, Henry cleaned up the kitchen, then sat in his living room with a book. But he didn't open it right away. He just sat there, feeling the quietness of his apartment, the sense of peace that had become familiar. He thought about that Wednesday a year ago when he'd felt invisible and stuck and so tired. If he could go back and tell that version of himself anything, what would he say? Maybe just this: the stairs. Take the stairs. Not because taking the stairs would fix everything. Not because it was some magic solution. But because taking the stairs would be the first small choice in a long series of small choices, each one adding up in ways he couldn't predict or measure, each one gradually building a different life. The victories that mattered most were the ones no one saw. The quiet decisions made in private moments. The discipline of small things, repeated faithfully. The courage to start again after setbacks. The patience to trust that incremental changes were still changes, even when they felt invisible. This was what Henry had learned. Transformation doesn't usually announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. It happens quietly, in the margins of ordinary days, in the spaces between what we were and what we're becoming. And sometimes, the greatest victory of all is simply becoming someone you don't need to escape from. Someone you're content to be, in the quiet of an ordinary evening, in the privacy of your own life. Henry opened his book and began to read. Outside his window, the city lights glowed softly. Another day was ending. Another day had been lived, fully and intentionally. And tomorrow he would get up and do it all again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because somewhere along the way, in all those invisible moments, Henry had stopped just surviving his life and started living it. And that quiet, private transformation was the victory no one saw but everyone could feel. 2 years later, Henry would wake up on another Wednesday morning. He would go for his run, make breakfast, take the stairs at work. The routine would be so ingrained that he wouldn't think about it. But that evening, sitting in a coffee shop waiting for Emma, his girlfriend of nearly 2 years now, he overheard two people at the next table. One was saying to the other, "I just feel stuck, you know? Like I'm going through the motions. I don't even know how to start changing things." Henry would think about speaking up, about telling them what he'd learned. But the truth was too big and too small to put into words that would make sense to a stranger. How do you tell someone that everything can change by doing almost nothing? That the secret is simply to choose, every day, to do the smallest thing differently? That transformation isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of ordinary moments, lived with intention? You can't really. It's something each person has to discover for themselves. But Henry would catch the person's eye and smile. A small, knowing smile, and somehow, in that moment, the stranger would feel a flicker of hope. Because hope, like change, often comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up as someone who has walked the path, even if we never speak a word about it. The quiet victories multiply that way, rippling outward in ways we can't measure or see. But they're real. They're always real.